Hey guys, another video for our how to do stuff in Japan playlist, and it's another heads up video. It's one of those ones you can't do much about it. It's just more about being aware of it and knowing about it, so it might help influence how you react to it. Some of you will also recognize this topic because we've talked about it a lot over the years, including a few times recently, and it's the way in which Japanese people communicate, or perhaps don't communicate, or something. And what triggered it today was a series of things in a row. One is some of the keen observers might notice that I'm still driving in this noisy old loaner car, right? That was supposed to be for initially it was supposed to be for an afternoon, and then it was supposed to be for a couple of days. And anyway, what I didn't mention when we talked about this loaner car previously is that since then, which was now about three or more weeks, almost 4 weeks ago, the guy who rents the car, or the business that rents the car to me, hasn't called me, right? So I deal directly with the owner. It's just a small business, and I deal directly with him. And the last I heard was 3 to 4 weeks ago, he called and said that the aircon in that car couldn't be fixed. They're going to trash it and get me a new one. And at the time I had to go to the car and get my stuff out of it, so I went to his workshop and got all my stuff out of it, and he actually had a photo of the Suzuki Wagon-R that he was getting, and he showed it to me. So this is Suzuki Wagon-R I'm getting. It's 3 years old, it's got 30,000 kilometers on it. There it is, you know. Oh, fabulous. And he said, so I'll call you in a couple of days, he said. And of course, this is all in Japanese, of course, but that's basically what he said. He called me in a couple of days, and that was 3 or 4 weeks ago. And in Japan, we just have to accept this. This is what happens a lot, and you don't know what it means. You know, has there been a problem getting that car? Is it still coming, but there's some delay? You know, what is it? And because for 3 or 4 weeks I've been thinking, so I wonder what's happening with that car. You know, every time I climb into this little one, sit down in this little car, I think, when's my Wagon-R coming? And usually I wouldn't call because there's not a lot of point. You know, you get this sort of a thing where you want to call and find out, but you know it's Japan, so calling probably won't give you any new information. Oh yeah, I got to do it. All right, so I called him up this morning and I said, hi, and straight away you could tell he was sort of embarrassed that I was calling. He's like, oh, sumimasen, gomen nasai, very sorry, straight away. And then he said, and I said, first thing I said to him is, oh look, I love this Daihatsu, this thing I'm driving here that I don't like very much. First thing I said to him is, I love this Daihatsu, it's a good car, and the aircon's really good, it's really good, no problem at all. But I'm just curious. Actually, in Japanese, they don't really have a word for curious. They say, I want to know. And the only way you can make it softer is to say, I sort of want to know, or a little bit want to know, and sort of said to him, you know, what's happening with the car, you know, and he said, oh, anytime, maybe tabun shiranai, this week, maybe I don't know, maybe I don't really know, but this week, right? And that was the end of it. And so really at the end I'm a little bit better informed now. I know that, okay, it is still coming, but we just don't know when. So I have a little bit more information now than I did before the phone call. But what's really typical is this Yoku Okaranai. I actually made a video once called Don't Really Know, because that's what it means. Love doing that. They drive along looking down at their phone, you hit the horn, they freak out. Yeah, that's usually what you get, a lot of Yoku Okaranai. And so I had that this morning, and then I was talking to one of our family friends who has just made an offer. He sent an email to his real estate agent, and he showed him a piece of land on Google Earth, and he said, I want to buy this, can you offer them whatever he offered them, I can't remember, 18 million yen or something, $180,000, something like that. And he did that a week ago, and he was saying to me this morning, I told the guy a week ago to offer, and I said, what happened? He said, oh, don't really know. And so he made an offer on a piece of land a week ago, and the real estate agent apparently said to him, okay, you know, hi, wakarimasu, and then he didn't hear anything, right? And it's been a week, and I said to him, he said, doshio, what should I do? And I said, why don't you give him a call? Oh, stubborn and all this, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And so anyway, I said, you give him a call. So he gave him a call, and it turns out, and then the real estate guy says to him, is that your piece of land or something? So he showed me what he'd sent. He'd sent a Google map image of this piece of land, and he said a little bit of polite Japanese first about how hot the weather's been, because that's what they do, and then he said, please offer the owner 18 million yen. Sen hapyakuman was. And it was clear as day, even to me, right? It was clear as day, that's what he said. And this real estate guy had misinterpreted it and thought it was his block of land or something. And instead of calling him and saying to him, oh, is this your land, do you want to sell it, or asking some questions, he just didn't do anything. So nothing happened for this last week while this guy's waiting for an answer. And if I hadn't have said to him this morning, give him a call, find out what's going on, he probably wouldn't have called him for another week, and in the meantime nothing's happened. And this sort of stuff happens all the time. So the purpose of this video is just a heads up. Again, we've talked about this a lot over the years, but you've just got to accept that this is what's normal here, and getting sort of strong about it won't help. In fact, it's interesting, I have had some conversations over the years with people. Japanese people are aware of the fact that Western people or non-Japanese people are often very straight talkers, not just Western people. I've got some Chinese friends that are pretty straight talkers, but Japanese people are aware that a lot of people who aren't Japanese are very straight talkers. And when they tell you that, they go, oh, I think usually they see things like this on television, they see people talk about this sort of thing on TV, and so they'll sort of be aware of it, and they'll sort of say, oh, so people who are not Japanese, gaikokujin, people who are not Japanese, are very straight, very direct. But when they tell you, you can sort of see they're a bit bemused by it, because they don't see it as being a good thing. They just see it as being, like, usually impolite, right? Some of you remember the example recently of the bank. When I walked in the bank, I wanted to do a bank transfer, and the first question she asked was, do you have your stamp with you, your inkan, your hanko? And I said no. And she'd spent another 10-15 minutes faffing around looking at computers and doing other things before she said to me, we can't do the transfer without your stamp. And because from their point of view, if she just said, when I said I'd like to do this bank transfer, if she said, do you have your stamp? And I said, no, I don't have my stamp. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, you can't do it without your stamp. We would think that was good communication. They would think it was abrupt and impolite, because it's just like discarding me, giving me that sort of wipe off really quickly. No, I can't do it without your stamp. That's the way they'd see it. Whereas we'd see it as just not wasting my time. Whereas she was obliged to spend another 10-15 minutes faffing around looking at the computer and doing other things to sort of draw it out, so it didn't seem like she was just wiping me off, and that's one of the differences. I remember having a conversation with a guy once who lives out here in the countryside, and he worked for a company making car parts, but it was actually owned by a Swiss company. And this guy's English was pretty good, and he was telling me about his boss who would come from Switzerland sometimes, and they'd have meetings with this boss from Switzerland, and he was saying, oh, sometimes he yells at us and swears at us. And I said to him, yeah, I'm sure he'd be more direct than what Japanese bosses usually are. And he, oh, yeah. And I said, and you got to be the same with him, He said that this boss the Swiss guy would get frustrated when he'd ask a question and they wouldn't answer it. They'd answer it and he wouldn't like the answer. And I said to him, you'd have to say yes or no. And he laughed and he said, that's what he says. So apparently what happens is the Swiss guy would say, can you get this job finished by Friday? And then they'd say to him in English, but in Japanese style, oh, it's a little difficult. Because that's how Japanese people say no. They don't say no. They say, oh, it's a little difficult. And for Japanese people, chotto muzakashi desu ne, if someone says that means no. And they know that means no. They know it means it's impossible, right? But if they say that to the Swiss boss, the boss is going to hear, it's difficult, but it's possible. That's what he's going to hear, isn't he? If they say, oh, it's a little difficult, and apparently he'd get really pissed off with them and say, yes or no, and because he just wants them to say, look, I'm really sorry, no, we can't get it done by Friday. That's what he wants to hear, the yes or the no. And they're sort of, oh, it's a little bit difficult. You know, so some of the stuff that they do, they mutually understand the meaning. So if someone tells you something's a bit difficult, it means it's not possible. However, there's a lot of stuff that they talk about where at the end of it there's confusion about what the actual meaning was, and I get this all the time. I get this all the time where my wife will call up and talk to City Hall for 30 minutes about something, you know, something that we want to know, or she'll call up some company that she's got to get something from for her work or something, and she'll be on the phone for 30 minutes, and then she'll get off the phone. I'll say to her, "How'd you go?" "Ah, yoko karanae, don't really know." And she just had 30 minutes talking on the phone. But when you listen to the phone call, a lot of what they're saying is just fluff. It's just fluff, and they're just talking around in circles, and it's just fluff, and there's lots of this doshio, what should we do? It's a little bit difficult. What should we do? There's a lot of that sort of stuff goes on, you know. And we had one recently where she called up City Hall and spoke for 30 minutes. When she got off the phone, I said, you know, "How'd you go?" Yoko karanae. Yoko karanae, don't really know. Right? It's just what they do. It's just what they do. They're just, I don't know, it seems that in most of their communication, it's programmed, right? So if I walk in the dojo, if it's afternoon, I say, I walk in, konnichiwa, onegaishimasu, and everybody walks in the dojo and says, konnichiwa, onegaishimasu, konnichiwa, onegaishimasu, to everybody. They all say it to everybody they meet. Konnichiwa, onegaishimasu. Maybe the occasional comment about how hot it is, right? Or in winter they comment how cold it is, but the rest of it is on the same stuff. Konnichiwa, onegaishimasu. And then when I go to the dojo on a Friday night, it's konbanwa, onegaishimasu, konbanwa, onegaishimasu. And so my point is that a lot of Japanese communication is programmed. In this case, you say this, you know, you walk in home, tadaima, okaeri, you know, itekimasu when you're going, itekimasu, ai terushai, and it's all programmed, and they all say the same thing. So, and that's what they're used to. When you walk into a shop, they always greet the customer with the same greeting, and you know, when you're leaving, they always say the same thing, and they always. But when someone's got to say something that they haven't said before, they don't like it. And I know, talking about City Hall, my wife hates having to call anybody and talk to anybody on the phone. Absolutely hates it. And so sometimes we'll get a letter in the mail and I'll look at it, oh yeah, what's this? And the phone is so difficult to communicate anyway, if Japanese isn't your first language, that I really don't like to call on the phone if I can avoid it. So occasionally I've asked her, would you mind calling these guys? And she hates it. They just don't like to do something that they're not programmed to do. To have a conversation they're not programmed to have, that they haven't had 100 times before, and that they've never heard anyone else have before. You know, and for years I thought that was just me, and then I was talking to another Japanese guy once, and he said the same thing. He said he hates making phone calls like that too. And then my American friend told me that his Japanese wife hates it as well. And so what I've done in the past, when letters come from City Hall, and I can see it's from the tax desk, and I think I can get my wife to phone, or I can go to City Hall, because fortunately we live in a little town, so it's easy to go to City Hall, and it's much easier to communicate across the counter, you know. So it just, there's this, they just don't like communicating about anything they haven't communicated about before. They don't like being direct. So if they've got a problem with something, or they want an answer to something, they don't like being direct. And that's, until now I've been talking about business sort of related stuff, you know, but in their personal lives too. Some of you who've been with us a long time might remember a story from years ago where there was a dude I used to hang out with when I was single, and we used to drink a lot, and we used to race go-karts, and we used to go paragliding, and we used to do all sort of single guy stuff, you know. And then I got married, and then I had a kid, and so I stopped doing all that stuff, you know, and I hadn't seen him for a while. And instead of him sending me a message and saying, hey, haven't seen you for a while, let's go have a beer, to which I would have said, okay, let's do that, right? But instead of doing that, he called a mutual friend. So that guy's the same age as me, and he's got another school friend who I know as well, who's a mutual friend. So he called him. So instead of just sending me a message and saying, haven't seen you for a long time, let's go get a beer, he sent a message to this other guy and said, I haven't seen that guy for a long time. What's going on with him? And that guy, instead of that guy sending a message to me saying, "Oh, this bloke's been looking for you, you know, you should send him a message," that guy's told his wife, "Oh, this guy's," you're still with me? So the first guy that hadn't seen me for a long time, that wondered what had happened to me, sent this, instead of sending me a message, sent a message to this other guy and said, "What's going on with him? I haven't heard from him for a long time." And that guy, instead of just talking to me directly, spoke to his wife and said, "This guy's wondering what's happened with that guy because he hasn't seen him for so long." And that lady contacted my wife, right? And said to my wife, "Oh, listen, these guys used to hang out, and then recently he hasn't been contacting him, and he wants to know what's happening." And so the first guy asked the second guy, who asked his wife, who asked my wife. And that's typical Japanese communication. You know, quite often, you know, Westerners or non-Japanese people might see that sort of behaviour, something like dobbing or something like that, because quite often they'll do that. Instead of talking directly to you, they'll go to either your senpai or your boss or your someone else or a mutual friend or someone else to talk to them about it. And then what happens from that is it just blows up into a big thing. It just came to my mind. I was at a yakiniku restaurant last week. Yakiniku is actually originally a Korean thing, but it's really popular in Japan. It's like a barbecue in the middle of your table. Made a video about it a long time ago. Really, really good stuff, yakiniku. And we're at this yakiniku restaurant, and someone at the table, we won't mention who, has a birthday coming up soon, right? And it said on the menu, if it's your birthday within 2 weeks or something, you get this free cake, right? And it was on the dessert menu. And then so when the staff guy came by to pick up some stuff off the table, they've said, the people at the table with me have said, "Oh, you know, this birthday thing, what's the story of that?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, you can have you can have the cake." And he said, "Oh, of course you need ID, you need driver's license or something." And the person, who shall remain nameless, whose birthday it is, didn't happen to have a driver's license on him because it was in the car. But the point is, there was this huge discussion, and all it was a free bit of cake, right? That we're talking about, and end up with this huge discussion with all the people at the table talking with this waiter guy about this piece of cake, and oh, no driver's license, and I should go to the car and get it, and just this big discussion. All right, it was me. It's my birthday coming up. So I just said, "No, it's all right. It's not, because it just wasn't worth going to the car to get a driver's license and bring it back and give it to this waiter just to get a piece of cake." But the point is, the discussion was massive. Everybody had this big discussion. Everybody had to join in on this big discussion about, I don't know, I can't even, most of it's just fluff. Oh, doshio. Doshio is what should we do? And in situations like that, you get that a lot. Everyone's doshio, and the waiters doshio, and everyone sort of, "Oh, what should we do? And what's the date?" And there was a bit of discussion working out when the birthday was and when what 2 weeks was from today, and just, it's typical, and it often happens. You get, you know, some small thing that's not important, but when they talk about it, becomes a huge discussion where most of what's talked about is not really useful or effective or important, you know. And I made a video a while ago talking about work, that, you know, a lot of us in English say work harder, not smarter, whereas in Japanese thinking, you know, no, hang on, wait a minute. Usually English speakers say work smarter, not harder, don't we? Work smarter, not harder. But in Japanese life, it's usually work harder, not smarter. So the working smarter doesn't enter into it. It's working hard that works into it. How many hours you do and how many days a week you do. And that tends to be how they think about these things, you know. And often in the communication, it's the same. They're not going for the quality of the communication. They're going for the quantity of the communication. The junior high school has a principal who gets up regularly. I'm not sure how often, but it seems to be regularly. I get told regularly that nothing happened after lunch today because the principal was having a speech for an hour and a half, and they just get up and waffle on with their speeches and go on and on and on, and just no substance to it at all. You know, the quality is low, the quantity is high. And it always reminds me of the principal I had at my elementary school, who used to get up and he'd say, right, you guys need to, you know, too much rubbish getting dropped on the ground, we need to pick all that up, you know, and stop dropping rubbish on the ground. Does everyone understand? Yes. And then he'd say, don't talk about it. And all of us would say, do it. And that was his motto. Don't talk about it, do it. Don't talk about it, do it, you know. And that was what was drummed into us when we were elementary school. And it's the opposite here. There's a lot of talking about it. Talking about it is the essential thing, and on and on and on and on. And the quality of the talking about it is low and the quantity is high, you know, and it just goes on and on and on. And this yoko karane, don't really know, and not telling you stuff. You know, that real estate guy not calling our friend and telling him or asking him any questions. There's just a bit of a mystery there. He didn't quite understand, it seems, what our friend was asking him. But instead of calling him or sending him answering the email and saying, I'm sorry, what do you want me to do? Which was quite clear, by the way. Instead of doing that, he just didn't do anything. You know, and the car guy was the same. Instead of calling me up, and I mean, obviously he's been doing stuff with this car, so he hasn't forgotten it. But instead of just giving me a quick call sometime in the last 3 or 4 weeks and saying, oh, sorry, it's coming, you know, it's coming, we haven't forgotten, it's coming. Instead of doing that, he just didn't do anything, and he waited till I called him, and then he was like, oh, etto nandake, etto, you know, these, a lot of the stuff they say, when you hear one of these conversations, if you actually wrote down what they're saying, a lot of the words, just there's no meaning. Etto is like, etto nandake, just what? Etto nandake, like, just what? Just what? Etto nandake, doshio, soshio, doshio, right? All this fluff. If you wrote down what it meant, 90% of these conversations are just fluffy stuff. Softening, it is fluff. It's to soften the conversation, because they see direct communication. That's what I was saying before, that occasionally someone will say to me, I think there must have been something on TV at some stage, because occasionally someone will say, oh, you know, people who aren't Japanese speak very directly, don't they? And they always say it in a sort of a bemused way, because to them that doesn't sound good at all. They don't like the sound of that at all. That sounds a bit intimidating and scary and impolite and unpleasant, you know, as far as they're concerned. They don't like the sound of that at all. Whereas for us, that's what we want, isn't it? Like our Swiss friend, he wants yes or no. That's what he wants. He doesn't want, oh, it's a little bit difficult, what shall we do, what shall we do? That's another one in that fluffy stuff. I should do a video just about all these fluffy words sometimes, because there's so many of them that have a soft meaning or no meaning or not a clear meaning, and this is the problem. They don't see it as a problem, by the way. They're quite happy with it just the way it is. They're quite happy not to know. I made a video that time saying don't really know, and they're quite happy not to really know. You know, my wife's quite comfortable with that. When she gets off one of those phone calls where there's been 30 minutes of talk and at the end of it she doesn't really know, she's quite happy with that. I'll say to her, how'd you go? Oh, I don't really know. And she's got no problem with that at all. She's just, for them, they're used to not really knowing. They're used to everything being a bit of a mystery, and they're sort of, their thinking is they don't need to know. That you know, someone will tell them if they need to know, and if nobody tells them, they don't need to know. You know. So if I hadn't prompted that guy today to ring that real estate guy, he probably wouldn't have. So that probably would have gone on for a few more weeks there with nothing happening, because the real estate guy didn't understand what he'd said. So nothing would have happened, and they would be quite comfortable with that. So the point of this video, it's just a heads up video, because it doesn't matter how long you live here, and those people who live here watch our videos will be sitting there going, oh yeah, and no doubt some of you guys will have examples of this sort of stuff that's happened to you. There are exceptions to all these things we talk about. There's always exceptions. You know, I have met some reasonably straight talkers here, but you know, not when it counts. Not when it counts. So no doubt some of the people who watch this video live here or have lived here in the past will have examples of this stuff themselves that they'll share with us, because quite often they're keen to get it off their chest, you know, because it doesn't matter how long you live here and how aware you are of how normal this is. It's frustrating, because that don't really know thing, you know, we don't like that, do we? We want to know, usually, don't we? We want to know what's happening, you know. So anyway, that's enough of that. Doshio, Yoko Wakaranai. Okay, more videos coming soon.